The grand alien hall was filled with laughter, echoing from its high crystal walls. Hundreds of alien nobles sat in golden seats, their jeweled robes glittering under the glowing lights. They had gathered not for war, not for trade, but for entertainment, mockery at the expense of one human. The human stood alone in the center, a man with plain clothes and tired eyes. His face was calm, but around him the aliens hissed, whispered, and laughed. "Play for us, human." One of the warriors shouted, his voice mocking. "Show us how weak you are. Show us how clumsy your kind truly is." Another voice joined. "Yes, let him try the Xenotone. He won't even know how to hold it." The crowd roared in agreement. The Xenotone was no ordinary instrument. It was long and curved like silver bone, with glowing strings that shimmered like liquid fire. Only the finest alien musicians could play it, and even they struggled to master its songs. For centuries, it was said no outsider had ever produced a true note from it. The challenge itself was an insult. To hand the Xenotone to a human was like handing a sword to a child and asking him to fight a champion. Guards brought the instrument forward, setting it before the human with dramatic gestures, as if they were presenting a sacred relic. The man reached out slowly, his hand brushing across the glowing strings. A ripple of sound escaped, strange, sharp, and broken. The aliens burst into laughter, some nearly falling from their seats. "He can't even touch it without breaking it," one shouted. But the human didn't react. He lifted the Xenotone carefully into his hands. His eyes studied its alien curves, the strange glowing veins that pulsed with energy. He had never seen anything like it before, but his fingers moved across it with surprising steadiness, as if recognizing something familiar. The hall quieted slightly, confusion spreading. "Does he actually think he can play it?" a noblewoman sneered. "This will be amusing." Another added, "When he fails, we will send him back to his world in shame." The queen herself leaned forward from her high throne, her sharp eyes locked on the human. She had ordered this test. To her, humans were nothing but fragile animals, amusing but useless. The human shifted his stance, holding the Xenotone close. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. He did not hear the laughter anymore, nor the insults. In his mind, he heard something else, memories of Earth, of sounds he once knew. He remembered wooden guitars played by firelight, pianos in small houses, violins that could make entire rooms fall silent. Music was not just sound, it was memory, it was soul. He opened his eyes. The hall expected clumsy noise, expected failure, expected another reason to laugh at him. The aliens leaned forward, ready to enjoy his humiliation. The human tightened his grip and brushed a string again, this time slower, gentler. The note rang out clearer than before. Still rough, still strange, but enough to make the closest aliens blink in surprise. A warrior frowned. That sounded different. The human said nothing. He adjusted his hands, touching the glowing strings with more confidence. He could feel the vibrations, not just through the air, but through his bones. The Xenotone was alive, in a way. It was waiting for something, and he was beginning to understand. The crowd grew restless. "Play, human," one shouted. "Show us your weakness." Laughter followed again, but it was weaker this time, less certain. The man's calm expression unsettled them. He was not nervous. He was not shaking. He was preparing. The queen raised her hand, silencing the noise. Her voice rang out across the hall, cold and sharp. "Human, you stand before the court of the Valari Empire. You have been given the honor of touching our sacred Xenotone. If you fail, you will be remembered as nothing more than a fool who dared to insult our traditions. If you succeed..." She paused, her smile cruel. "Then perhaps we will admit your kind are not entirely worthless. Begin." The hall went silent again, all eyes on the human. He gave no answer to her words. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, his hands steady on the Xenotone. The instrument glowed faintly, as if reacting to him. He drew in one deep breath, blocking out everything, the grand hall, the laughing aliens, even the queen's piercing gaze. All that remained was the instrument in his hands and the music inside him waiting to escape. The first moment stretched endlessly, the entire hall frozen in suspense. Some aliens whispered, others scoffed, but none dared move. They all waited for him to strike the first true note. The human finally moved his fingers, ways pressing against the glowing strings. The Xenotone hummed, vibrating with power. His other hand slid across its curve, coaxing the sound to life. The hall filled with a low hum, strange yet haunting, like the wind before a storm. The laughter faded completely, and in that instant, before a real melody even began, many aliens felt something unsettling. They had mocked him. They had wanted a spectacle. But now, for the first time, they felt a weight pressing on their chests, a feeling they could not name. The challenge had begun, but none of them were ready for what the human would unleash. The hum of the Xenotone still lingered in the air, soft and strange, but it was enough to hold the entire hall captive. The aliens who had laughed only moments before now sat straighter in their seats, eyes narrowing as if they had misheard. The human stood perfectly still, his hands resting gently on the glowing strings. He breathed slowly, his chest rising and falling as if preparing for something much greater than a game. Some aliens leaned toward each other, whispering, their mocking tones replaced with uncertainty. "Why is he so calm?" one muttered. "He should be trembling by now." Another sneered, but even his voice shook. "It is only luck. He cannot keep it up." Still, no one laughed. The man's face showed no pride, no arrogance. His eyes were heavy with something deeper, something the aliens could not name. He looked not at them, not at the queen, not even at the Xenotone itself. His gaze drifted far away, as if he stood in another world. He shifted his hands across the instrument, searching, testing, learning the strange weight of it. His fingers pressed lightly, and the Xenotone pulsed with a faint light in answer. For a moment, the hall itself seemed to breathe with him. The crystal walls shimmered faintly, as though the sound he had drawn out moments ago had not yet faded. The air grew heavy, carrying an odd sense of waiting. The crowd expected another mistake, another clumsy stroke they could laugh at. Instead, the man's posture changed. His back straightened, his grip steadied. He was no longer a man given a toy. He was a musician ready to speak. He closed his eyes again. Images filled his mind. An old street on Earth where children had danced to the sound of guitars, a dim church where voices rose together in song, the quiet corner of a home where a piano carried the sadness of a lonely night. He remembered the war, the loss, the graves. He remembered the laughter of friends who never returned. Every memory was sound to him, every sorrow a chord, every joy a note. The Xenotone vibrated under his touch as though it felt the weight of those memories. A shimmer of light traveled up its curved frame, glowing brighter around his hands. A ripple of surprise ran through the audience, whispers breaking out again. "It responds to him?" one alien said with disbelief. Another shook his head, eyes wide. "That should be impossible. Only our kind can awaken it." Still, the human did not open his eyes. He let his fingers slide across the strings, softer this time, like a secret spoken only to himself. The sound that followed was not broken noise. It was fragile, uncertain, but alive. A few of the youngest aliens in the hall gasped quietly, clutching their robes. Their parents silenced them with sharp gestures, but their own expressions had begun to harden. Something was wrong. This was no trick, no accident. The queen leaned back in her throne, her lips tightening. She had expected a fool's attempt, nothing more. Instead, she felt a strange chill in her chest, as if the air had grown heavier. Her eyes narrowed on the human, watching him with sudden intensity. The man opened his eyes at last. They were not the eyes of someone desperate to impress, nor the eyes of someone afraid. They were the eyes of someone carrying a weight too heavy for words, a weight only sound could release. His hands moved again, firmer now, and the Xenotone glowed in answer. A deeper tone spread across the hall, shaking the very air. The aliens stiffened in their seats, their bodies reacting before their minds understood. The whispers stopped. Silence pressed against every corner of the hall. The human stood there, steady and quiet, preparing for the melody that would decide not only his fate, but theirs as well. The first true note rose, clear and haunting, like a voice calling from a distant world. It was not the harsh, broken sound the aliens had expected. It was gentle yet heavy, carrying a weight none of them understood. The hall that had been alive with mocking voices only moments ago fell into silence so deep that even the smallest breath seemed loud. Every alien eye locked onto the human as if he had become something entirely different. The Xenotone glowed brighter, its strings pulsing with light as his fingers moved carefully across them. Each touch released sounds that did not belong to this world. The melody was uneven at first, fragile, as though it was struggling to find its shape, but beneath it there was something raw, something alive. It was not the technical perfection the aliens prized in their music. It was something deeper. An old warrior sitting near the front shifted uneasily. His hardened face twitched, and his hand pressed against his chest. He had never heard a sound like this, one that seemed to reach inside him and stir memories long buried. He glanced around and saw others with the same unsettled expression. One noble tried to laugh, but no sound came out. His throat had tightened. The human's eyes were fixed on the instrument, but he was not playing for the crowd. He was lost inside the music, letting it pour from the weight of his memories. His hands trembled only slightly, not from fear, but from the depth of what he carried. The notes grew stronger, weaving together, pulling the silence of the hall into a spell. Some of the younger aliens in the back felt warmth behind their eyes and rubbed them quickly, confused by the wetness on their faces. Tears were rare among their kind and never caused by music. Yet here they were, overcome by sounds they could not explain. The hall's crystalline walls shimmered faintly with the vibrations, as if even the building itself was listening. The queen, who had been leaning forward, now sat frozen, her sharp gaze unable to look away. She had demanded proof of humanity's worthlessness, but instead she felt a strange tightening in her throat. She told herself it was anger, yet her hand had curled around the armrest of her throne as though she needed to hold on. The human's fingers slid again, pulling out a sequence of notes that rose higher, softer, and then dipped low like a sigh of grief. The sound echoed through the hall, not bouncing back as mere noise, but settling into every ear, every heart. The aliens were not simply hearing the music, they were feeling it. One melody followed another, and with each, the hall grew heavier with emotion. Warriors who had never bowed their heads in battle now found themselves staring at the floor. Noble women wiped at their eyes when they thought no one was watching. Even the guards by the doors stood rigid, their spears trembling slightly in their hands. The human was not aware of their struggle. He was no longer in the hall, not truly. In his mind, he walked through fields of his home, heard laughter of friends long gone, saw faces of people he had loved and lost. His music carried those memories, shaping them into sound, sending them into the hearts of every listener. By the time the first section of his melody ended, the hall was unrecognizable. No jeers, no laughter, no words, only silence and the sound of breathing. The mocking crowd had vanished, and in its place sat an audience held captive, as though chained by invisible hands. The human looked up briefly, his eyes glancing across the sea of alien faces. He saw their silence, their trembling, their confusion. He said nothing, only lowered his gaze back to the Xenotone and let his hands move again. This time, the melody rose with greater strength, and many realized with a sinking feeling that their world was about to change forever. The melody deepened, and with it came visions no alien expected to feel. Each note carried pictures, emotions, entire lifetimes hidden inside sound. The human's music painted stories more powerful than words, stories of love, loss, and the fragile beauty of existence. A noblewoman gasped softly, clutching her chest as the melody rose like sunlight over a quiet earth morning. She did not know what a sunrise on earth looked like, but through the sound she saw it, warmth spreading over fields, the laughter of children chasing each other, the comfort of a mother's hand. For a moment she forgot she was alien, forgot her crown, forgot her pride. The tune shifted, becoming heavier, darker. The warriors in the front row stiffened as memories not their own invaded their hearts. They saw soldiers in muddy trenches, smoke filling the sky, men with dirt-streaked faces clutching one another as bombs fell. They heard the echo of gunfire wrapped inside the notes, felt the grief of burying a friend too young to die. Their proud hearts, trained for war, trembled with sorrow they had never allowed themselves to feel. The Xenotone glowed brighter with every change in the song, as though it too had been waiting for this moment. Each pulse of light matched the rhythm of the music, filling the hall with waves of color. The walls themselves reflected the sound, humming gently, amplifying the human's sorrow until no one could escape it. A young alien prince leaned forward, his wide eyes wet with tears. He had never cried before, not once in his life. His father, seated beside him, noticed and tried to whisper a warning, but even his own voice failed. The music had found its way into his chest as well, shattering walls he had spent decades building. The queen gripped her throne so tightly the jeweled armrest cracked under her hand. She tried to convince herself that this was trickery, some clever manipulation of the instrument. Yet, as the music swelled again, she saw something, an image of a woman on a distant world holding a child in her arms, singing softly while the stars shone above them. A lullaby. It pierced her heart, and for the first time in centuries, the queen of the Villari Empire felt her eyes sting. The human was lost in his playing, his body moving with the rhythm as if guided by something beyond him. His face showed both pain and peace, a man emptying his soul through sound. To him, every note was a farewell, every chord a memory he could not speak aloud. He was not trying to impress. He was remembering. The aliens, unable to look away, were forced to feel what he felt. Pride crumbled in the silence between notes. Arrogance drowned in the rising echoes. They were creatures who had never understood grief the way humans did, never known the fragile strength born from weakness. Now, through the music, they tasted it, and it broke them. The melody softened at last, sinking low like a whisper fading into darkness. The hall, once so full of voices, was now silent, except for the faint sound of sobbing scattered among the nobles. Tears glistened on faces that had never known them before. Even the warriors wiped their eyes, their pride forgotten. The human opened his eyes for only a moment, seeing the effect his music had carved into them. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply lowered his gaze again, his fingers preparing for the next rise, the next memory, the next truth that would bind their hearts tighter to his song. The melody shifted again, sharper now, cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. The human's fingers struck the glowing strings with strength, and the sound swelled, rising higher than before. It was no longer just sorrow or memory, it was defiance. The music carried a challenge, a demand that could not be ignored. Aliens who had once mocked him now sat frozen, their faces pale under the shifting glow of the Xenotone. Some pressed their claws or hands against their ears, but it was useless. The sound did not only enter through hearing, it reached deeper, sinking straight into their hearts. Their pride, their certainty of superiority was collapsing under each note. A nobleman who had been the loudest in his insults rose from his seat as if to protest, but his knees shook. His mouth opened, yet no sound came. The music pressed down on him like the weight of 1,000 storms. He stumbled back into his chair, trembling, his eyes wide with something he had never felt before: shame. The human's hands moved faster, weaving sounds that spoke of strength born from suffering. Every rise of the melody carried the voice of a people who had endured storms, wars, and loss, yet refused to break. The proud Velari nobles who believed their songs were unmatched began to realize the truth. Their music had been about beauty, about perfection, about control. His music was about survival, and it was stronger. The Xenotone itself began to glow so brightly that the hall shone like starlight. Energy surged across its frame as though the instrument had been waiting for this kind of touch. For centuries it had been played with skill, with precision, but never with soul. Now, under human hands, it awakened fully, singing with him, not against him. Whispers broke out, desperate and shaken. "Impossible," one alien muttered, his voice cracking. "No outsider should have this power." Another shook his head violently, his eyes wet. This is beyond music." Their words faded quickly into silence, drowned by the rising storm of sound. A warrior, scarred and unshaken in countless battles, found himself gripping his sword hilt so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He could not stop the tears burning in his eyes. The notes reminded him of the comrades he had lost, of faces he tried to bury in the shadows of his mind. He had thought himself unbreakable, but the human song shattered him with ease. The queen leaned forward, her eyes blazing, but not with anger. For the first time she looked at the human not as prey, not as weak flesh, but as something beyond her understanding. Her breath came slower, heavier, as though she too was fighting the weight pressing into her chest. She had thought to humiliate him, to show her people how laughable humans were. Instead, she watched her court tremble, their arrogance crushed by the very sound they had mocked. The melody reached a peak, every note carrying defiance, grief, hope, and rage, all bound together. The aliens who once saw themselves as untouchable now bowed their heads, unable to meet the human's steady gaze as he played. Some whispered prayers, others wept openly. their jeweled garments soaked with tears. And then, for a moment, the music softened again, almost tender, but the damage had already been done. The proudest race in the galaxy sat humbled before a single human, broken not by war, not by strength of arms, but by the simple, undeniable truth of a song. The hall trembled with the sound as the human drove the Xenotone into its final rise. His hands moved with urgency, not like a performer showing skill, but like a man pouring out the last pieces of his soul before it broke apart. The glowing strings lit the room in waves of gold and blue, washing over jeweled walls and silent faces. Every note climbed higher, sharper, carrying emotions the aliens had no words for. The melody built like a storm gathering above a helpless city. Each chord struck harder, echoing against the crystal walls until it felt as though the very structure of the hall might shatter under the weight of it. Aliens clutched at their chests, their breath stolen, their eyes wide with helpless awe. They could no longer look at each other. It was as if they feared anyone would see the cracks in their pride. The queen's fingers dug deep into her throne. Her body was rigid, yet she trembled despite herself. She had ruled empires, commanded armies, and crushed rebellions without flinching, but she could not fight this. The music pierced her crown, her armor of pride, her cold heart. For the first time in centuries, she felt powerless. The human's face was pale, sweat shining across his brow, yet his eyes burned with fierce determination. His body shook with effort, but his fingers did not falter. He struck the strings with every ounce of strength, drawing out a sound that grew louder and richer, as though the instrument itself had waited all its life for this moment. The Xenotone seemed alive, singing not with skill but with spirit, as though it had found its true master at last. A cry escaped from one of the nobles, raw and uncontrollable, as the melody surged. It was followed by another and another, until the hall echoed not with laughter, not with insults, but with sobs. The proud warriors wept openly, their tears falling onto polished armor. The youngest nobles clung to their elders, confused by feelings they could not contain. The melody did not simply play, it tore through every defense, forcing them to remember, to feel, to break. The music reached its highest point, no longer gentle but blazing, a cry of existence itself. It was humanity declaring, "We are here, we endure, we will never be silenced." The sound crashed over them like a wave of fire, burning away their arrogance, leaving only trembling hearts. And then, with one final sweep of his hand, the human released the last great note. It soared through the air, filling every corner of the hall, stretching into eternity before fading into silence. The glow of the Xenotone dimmed, its light flickering like the last spark of a dying star. His hands fell still, his chest heaving as though the music had taken everything from him. The silence that followed was heavier than the music itself. No one dared to move, no one dared to breathe. The aliens sat frozen, their eyes red, their hearts shaking. Even the queen, who had never bowed her head to anyone, could not lift her gaze from the man who stood before her. The final crescendo had ended, but the echo of it lived on inside every soul in that hall, and they knew nothing would ever be the same again. The last note faded into silence, yet its echo clung to the air like mist that refused to vanish. No one in the vast hall moved. The aliens who had once laughed now sat still, their faces streaked with tears they had never known they could shed. The proud warriors who had faced death without flinching now bowed their heads, ashamed of how easily a single human had stripped them bare. The nobles, once jeweled and radiant with arrogance, clutched their robes as if trying to hold together hearts that had been broken wide open. The queen rose slowly from her throne, her breath uneven, her jeweled crown heavy upon her brow. Her eyes were wet, though she tried to hide it. She looked at the human, standing alone in the center of the hall, pale and exhausted, his hands still resting on the silent Xenotone. He had not asked for applause, he had not demanded recognition. He had simply given them his soul, and it had undone them all. One of the youngest nobles whispered, voice trembling, What is he?" The question spread like a fire through the hall, though no one dared to speak it aloud again. They all knew the answer, though none wanted to admit it. He was human. He was human. And that word, once spoken with mockery and contempt, now carried weight heavier than their titles, heavier than their empire. The queen stepped down from her throne. Each of her footsteps echoed across the silent floor, sharp and unyielding. She stopped before the human, her gaze fixed on him. For a long moment she said nothing, her lips trembling against words she could not form. Then, in a voice softer than anyone ever heard from her, she spoke. No alien has ever played the Xenotone like this. No alien has ever made us weep. Her eyes lowered, the smallest gesture of surrender. Only a human could. A ripple of shock passed through the hall. The queen had never admitted weakness, never offered reverence to anyone. Yet here she stood, her words bending like steel under fire. The nobles shifted uncomfortably, not in anger, but in awe. They knew this moment would be carved into history, remembered long after their bones turned to dust. The human gave no speech. He did not boast or smile. He simply lowered the Xenotone gently onto its stand, bowing his head once, a gesture of respect not for their pride, but for the power of music itself. The silence stretched again, but this time it was reverent. Then, slowly, as if driven by an unseen force, the first alien rose from his seat and bent his head toward the human. Another followed, then another, until the entire hall, warriors and nobles alike, bowed low. The queen herself placed her hand across her chest, her crown dipping forward. The greatest court of the galaxy, once so sure of their superiority, knelt before the man they had mocked. Legends would later call it the Night of Tears, when an empire of stone hearts was broken by a single melody. And long after the hall emptied, long after the aliens returned to their homes, the sound of the humans' music lingered in their souls, a reminder that humanity was not weak, not laughable, not forgettable. Humanity was eternal, carried not by strength of arms, but by the power of a song that could move even the coldest stars to weep.